Welcome to the Irish NFL shows. We talk through the fallout from Super Wildcard Weekend in association with our partner QuinnBet. As those of you who are watching on YouTube Live will have seen on the screen there, we also, of course, giving a shout out to our live event coming up on March 28th when the season is settled and done. But we'll be looking forward to the draft at that stage. We'll be looking forward to the Aer Lingus College Football Classic. One of our partners for the night, QuinnBet and RuPoint. The other two partners for that special evening with Peter King of NBC, Mr. Football Morning in America, familiar, of course, to NFL viewers on this side of the Atlantic through his many contributions to Sky Sports, where you can see him on the weekend breaking down the games at halftime with Neil Reynolds and the crew. Very much looking forward to that. But right now we're reflecting on Bills, Steelers and Bucks, Eagles games from last night. Immediate implications from that are obvious. Of course, we now know all the matchups for the divisional round. So as a result of last night, the Bills will host the Kansas City Chiefs after their victory over Pittsburgh, and the Bucks will travel to Ford Field to play the Lions. Two feel-good stories there. And the early lines on those games, even incidentally from QuinnBet, are that the Bills are 3-point favorites in Orchard Park. The Bucks are catching 6 points on the road in Detroit, so the Lions expected to win by a touchdown in that one. But there's much else to discuss besides from the last 24 hours. First up, Brian, the games themselves. Let's start with the Eagles, who absolutely collapsed last night. I mean, we talked about this team sliding. We talked about being worried for them. We were split when we were picking the games last week. We had a couple of us going for the Bucks, a couple of us going for the Eagles. Look, I picked the Bucks. It did not in any way, shape, or form expect it to be this straightforward. And, you know, let's give the Bucks their props, and we'll get there in a moment in terms of what it means for them. But I think it's only fair that you start with the Eagles, given where they were last season, given where they were at a certain point in this season, 10-1. It's almost inconceivable that you'd be talking about the head coach of a team like that potentially being on the line. But there's a lot of reasons why Nick Sirianni's job is in question after last night.
Absolutely, because they downed tools for the last quarter of the season. Essentially, like they were 1-6 going into that game last night. I picked the Eagles. I thought they would find a way to rebound and galvanize themselves and accept the magnitude of a playoff game, but it was far from it. It was very much a team that, for me, were evident in terms of not playing for their head coach. The tackling on defense was very off-putting. The amount of times, the yards after catch, the breaking tackles, the touchdowns, 2 touchdowns. Like Baker Mayfield's numbers are a little bit distorted today because of those 2 touchdowns, I would say, because they should have been tackled earlier. But overall, it was just, there was no cohesion to the team. Offensively, they were completely off, with the exception of maybe the one big pass to Devontae Smith prior to halftime, and obviously they get a touchdown off that to Goddard. They didn't do anything else for the remainder of the game. And we touched on, even we put our piece out yesterday, which was a former interview, an interview we did during the summer, myself and Colin in the offseason with Kancey, the first round pick. I mean, he was troublesome all night. They were, the amount of times Buck and Aikman described the rush in which the Bucks were coming with, because essentially they couldn't handle any blitz patterns that were coming at them. They were all at sea.
There was a stat from the game column that the Bucks had 10 completely unblocked defenders in the backfield. It's the highest number, I think, since they started actually calculating stats on this, the advanced analytics. And like it was just striking how, firstly, that was happening, and secondly, that they weren't in any way doing anything to help. Like, they just stubbornly stuck to the same game plan on offense and defense that clearly wasn't working. And as you say, and Colin, maybe you picked this up as well, there was just no effort. Like Brian referred to the tackling being poor. It was almost non-existent. Like this was pathetic. It was a terrible performance.
Yeah, I was surprised Brian kind of went with him, not because of the Giants piece, but just because they had down tools. I talked about, like, when you heard Jalen Hurts talk over the last month, I mean, it's the stuff he was saying made no sense. It was so far removed from everything that we have seen. And I think that there will probably come kind of maybe a time where we get more information as to what exactly went wrong. But every step along the way, since they were 10-1 at the end of November, on the 1st of December they're 10-1. By the 4th of December they're 10-2, and then the real free fall begins. They made the change, but they brought in Matt Patricia. Now, Matt Patricia wasn't a good defensive coordinator in New England, when you think back to the number of points they gave up.
He wasn't a good
the
offensive
Eagles.
coordinator either,
He
but that's
wasn't
a
a good
whole other
offensive
story.
coordinator. He wasn't a good head coach in Detroit. By all accounts, he isn't a particularly nice individual either. So none of it made any sense. The offensive play calling has been poor ever since Shane Steichen left, and they just look completely devoid of ideas. They didn't tackle well. They didn't, they on offense. Like the other point, I suppose, and the offensive piece, I think, is crucial, because Sirianni is an offensive coach, right? He had a first-time play caller in his OC. He appeared to do nothing to help him, and he appeared to do nothing to help his players and his quarterback. Jalen Hurts has struggled. Well, his biggest struggle has been against the blitz, right? We know Todd Bowles likes to blitz. We have the Giants blitzed Hurts time and again. Week 16, week 18, the Cowboys did it. The Niners,
Cardinals did it.
everybody blitzed him.
And who has a better inside line on them than the Cardinals? Like, you just copy and paste Jonathan Gannon's playbook, which worked to perfection.
That's what they kept doing. And they did nothing to help him. Absolutely nothing. It was crazy to watch it. They kept calling vertical routes, curls, widespread. It was madness. You watched it, and it truly was that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And that is what we saw from a coaching staff who I think, and maybe we'll get into this a little, I think Brian has a point, but I think has to be on the hot seat.
I recorded a podcast earlier, which goes out on Thursday, with a Giants beat writer this afternoon, and he's got close ties to all the teams in the division, and he had said that one of the Eagles insiders that he's well in with said that the players had gone to Sirianni over the course of the last 5 to 6 weeks saying things aren't working, you're not adjusting to certain things in games, and all their points were being ignored. He wasn't listening to anything which anybody was saying. There was certain meetings going on around what they could do to adjust, and he didn't want a bar of it by all accounts. He was just continuing. It was if like nothing had changed from last year, but obviously so much has changed from last year. Players are a year on, players are in different form. You lose coaching staff. He hadn't adjusted as a head coach to all the changes, and also not just changes, but the nature of the fact that whether you win the Super Bowl or you don't win the Super Bowl, teams are coming after you the following year, and obviously they had a tougher schedule to play with. He kind of gets the sense that players would be relieved to see him gone. Now, whether that's going to happen or not, I have to say, now watching Howie Roseman and the owner last night in the stands towards the end, they look two very disgruntled characters. Like we've seen other teams get well beaten over the course of the weekend, and you could even throw Jerry in there. They didn't look as disappointed and downbeat as they looked certainly in the fourth quarter last night.
Colin, I mean, one of the things that Brian mentioned that I was picking up on as well is the effort level. Like, it was plain last night that the players had just effectively given up. Some of them, like Bradbury, got roasted in coverage. There was no tackling going on. It's probably unfair to even single out a player. Like, it was very obvious here that we can also come to narrative fallacy, right, and get on the bandwagon about, Sirianni's in trouble. But this isn't based on one game. This is based on a pattern which we've seen really since they got to 10-1. And if you want to wind the clock back a bit further, probably before then, like, we kept talking about how they were kind of relying on muscle memory and getting through games, and there were things that weren't quite right, and hoping and expecting, given the level of talent that's on that team. We want to see this team playing well. We want to see Jalen Hurts, who last year announced himself as one of the best quarterback talents in the league, playing at the highest level he can. Okay, AJ Brown was injured. You want to see Devontae Smith playing at the highest level. You want to see DeAndre Swift playing at the highest level. You want to see that formidable defense to put fear into the heart of opposition offenses last year, playing to the sum of its capability, because otherwise we're not getting the entertainment that we want as fans, selfishly. Like, we saw the Browns get well beaten, but they went out on their shields. Like, they emptied the tank. We saw other teams, the Dolphins got the run around from the Chiefs, but it's not like they weren't trying. They just really weren't at the level that was required of them, and decimated by injuries. The Eagles, that's something very, very different. And, it's not for no good reason that we're talking about Nick Sirianni potentially being fired.
The piece I'd add to it, Connor, is the history of the Eagles. This is the team that fired Andy Reid, who had a pretty good record there in Philly at a time when they hadn't won a Super Bowl, and then they went and they fired the head coach who did win them a Super Bowl. So they are not afraid to move on. They are not a team who I would say
despite their patient fan base who take the long view and don't tend to react.
Popcorn, anybody? No popcorn here tonight. No.
Philly, and good for them. They're not going to change on that side of things. But
don't ever change, Philadelphia. Don't ever change.
They won't. The thing I would point out though is if you are Laurie and you are Howie and you are sitting there and you look out there and you go, would Mike Vrabel get more out of this team? Like, think about the year when Lamar won the MVP. Baltimore went in, they played Tennessee, and the Titans beat them. And then over the years, Vrabel, there've been issues with the quarterback, obviously in Tennessee. But Vrabel, I believe, would get a lot more. You telling me Bill Belichick? Now the issue with Belichick is, would he be willing to coach rather than GM? But when you look at it, and I was going to maybe wait, but this might be as good a time as any to say it. I think there should be an awful lot of teams that at least pick up the phone and make some phone calls, to people around the league. Like, I'd ask Brian, do you think the Maras shouldn't at least pick up the phone to Vrabel and say, might you be interested? To Belichick and say, hey, you won a Super Bowl with us. Might you be interested in coming back? Given everything that we have heard this week about, and look, there's always leaks, and I tell everyone, take everything with a truckload of salt. But would you not at least pick up the phone to see, are they interested?
Well, sorry, Connor. It's interesting Colin says that, because this is not from what we did today. Obviously, the content today. This is more so from Boomer Esiason on the New York Sports this morning. He tends to throw out little nuggets of information every now and then, and which 9 times out of 10 he's quite accurate. That's why the guys on the show this morning were saying, "Where are you going with this?" Because you tend to usually put something out there if you have really definitive information. He suggested that Belichick to the Giants is not against the realms of possibility this offseason, but again, I just think that's too far. I think we're too far down that road. In terms of Belichick, I think Falcons makes so much sense. He has an opportunity to potentially run that division. I know the Bucs are in the divisional round, so maybe it's a bit disingenuous to say now, bearing in mind that they've won a playoff game, but that division is there for next year. And I think he would be mad to go to Dallas because he wants to get away from Kraft and an owner that's so much pressure and kind of deep thoughts on how the team should be run. We're going to get that if he goes into Dallas again.
Yeah, fair. And Fred makes a point in the comments, it wasn't just Philly who showed up small over the weekend, as he says himself, who shit the bed the biggest, Dallas or Philly. Not a good look for either organization. True, the sheets were looking like spuds and train spotting, I think, in both organizations over the weekend. Not pretty at all. And it's going to take a long time to get those stains out, that's for sure. One thing that we should mention about Philadelphia before we move on, though, we'd be remiss if we didn't. All the reports after the game suggesting very strongly, and unnamed players from the Philly locker room talking about the fact that it looks like Jason Kelce is going to retire. That's a big loss. He probably could have gone a season or even 2 seasons ago, stayed on. They got back to the Super Bowl last year, which was a great achievement. Certainly one of the greatest centers in the modern game. One of People Magazine's sexiest men alive as well. He's dripping with accolades at the moment. He's got the podcast with the brother. Great clip from last week, incidentally, of him getting emotional and rage quitting. That was very funny. But he's an emotional guy, and we're not going to take that away from him. And we can certainly identify the type. Colin, and you look at his role in the brotherly shove, which ironically was stopped last night. If ever there was a metaphor for the way Philadelphia's season went, it was that goal line stand from the Bucs, and credit Vita Vea for being the man who stuffed it ultimately. But his role in that exemplified, always looking to innovate, always at the forefront of technique. I mean, what he was able to do both on the line, blocking downfield, he put everything into everything, and he got the rewards that he deserved out of his career. 1 ring, came down close to getting a second one, and he'll be gutted to go out the way that they went out.
Yeah, and he was so key to everything that they did, and having a Hall of Fame caliber center is key. Like, this is a guy who helped his quarterback out immeasurably, and was so key, as you say, to the brotherly shove, and kind of fitting, I suppose, when the wheels truly came off, that didn't even work. I think they will miss him. They have obviously tried over the past few years to draft and develop and get guys, and they'll bring. I mean, I think Cam Jurgens will slot in there, but you're losing such a wealth of knowledge when Jason Kelsey, is gone. They will miss him, and that's, I think, another reason why I would be tending to say that they should move on, because when you lose a player of his caliber, you are going to need to get a new identity, and I think that they still have some nice pieces, but there are obvious holes on that roster. Look, he's going to go on to a very lucrative media career, and kudos to him, because certainly when I have seen him in the media, he is the antithesis of a hot take guy.
No, certainly is, and I'm sure he'll be showing up in Buffalo in the box at the weekend alongside Donna and Taylor Swift, and that's going to make some interesting viewing. We'll probably get more shots of that than we will of anything else when that game takes place against the Chiefs. But Brian, we've spent a lot of time talking about the Eagles now. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers actually won that game and won it well, and progressed to the divisional round where they'll face the Lions. And a lot of people don't like Baker Mayfield, and he's an outsized persona, and he rubs people up the wrong way. That's an unfortunate thing to say for a former quarterback of the Cleveland Browns, pardon me, given the current incumbent of that role. But he ultimately outlasted his former team and had the last laugh there. And good luck to him, I suppose. It's been a real redemption arc for him this season, and one of the more interesting storylines.
Yeah, they were talking about in the commentary last night, when he came in, and he was quizzing the Bucs as much as they were quizzing him around what the expectation is. And they said, we don't want you to change who you are, where you are, how you go about things. Your manner is fine for us. And we've seen over the course of the season, we touched on it in the preview show last week in the lead up to how the team have galvanized around him, and how the team are really enjoying having the experience of him as quarterback. And that's far from what we've seen over the course of the last few years, but in particular when he was in Cleveland and he was falling out with certain people. But look, he looks like he's kind of got to the stage now where he probably recognized this was probably one of his last real opportunities to be in a team that would give him a chance to kind of settle down, have a career, maybe 2 or 3 years. Like, they're already suggesting there's a contract on the way. But even last night, we were going into the game, and Colin touched on it last night around bits of piece that we had heard separately, that he's fine, he's not going to be in any way adversity and reaction of an injury last week. He looked last night like, I wouldn't say he was perfectly fine, but he got around the field well enough. He ran for a number of times. He seems to be making the right decision at the right time. There's no kind of erratic throws at times, sensible throws. There's ones on the perimeter where they're not getting caught, they're going out of bounds, they're not going to be picked off. It was a nice methodical game for him. I think he's going to have a real test this weekend. Whilst the Lions defense hasn't been the strongest this year, to go into Detroit and win this game, it would really be a hats off scenario. But no, look, it's fantastic. That's for a lot of Bucs fans, and which we know. And defensively, it's come together. Like you said it last week, Conor, we missed a trick at the start of the season when we were putting this team down as a team that are in a rebuild. Even a lot of pieces still there. And it was evident again last night. In Winfield, the game was all over the field. And we touched on the fact that he wasn't selected for the Pro Bowl. And
yeah,
bizarre.
Winfield, Vale, Levante David, they all showed up in a big way. David with that great tackle for the safety that, really showed up just how bereft the Eagles were of ideas and how hungry the Bucs were for the ball. Colin, I know you had a point to make on Baker, but one thing that perhaps we should honor on the podcast is, we've given a lot of flack to the NFC South over the season. At the end of the day, they made the divisional round. The champions of that division are in the divisional round. We kind of viewed it as almost the second bye for whoever got to play them, and this was kind of the get right game for the Eagles, and it didn't turn out that way. Indeed, we've 2 NFC North teams now in the divisional round. Nobody from the East, NFC Beast, becomes NFC Least again this year.
Yeah, the way I did also say on Thursday, if they were playing anybody else, I'd have probably picked whoever they were playing. They just happened to be playing the team that were in free fall. I think anyone.
For the weekend, right?
Look, all things are possible, and kudos to them. But on Baker, the piece I suppose I'm interested in is, what do you feel comfortable paying Baker? Like, what kind of contract? And this goes to the I suppose the point about, he has found a system there, but their OC is now getting head coaching offers. Mike Evans, like, if the OC moves on elsewhere, they've got to find a new OC. Like, what does that mean for Evans? Are they going to keep Evans, or if he doesn't end up taking a job, he stays? Do they then run it back?
Freeze frame on where Baker was after winning the playoff game in Cleveland, and everything was on the up and up, and they brought in OBJ, give him an extra weapon, and that didn't work out the way anybody planned in Cleveland.
Yeah, I just think you need, it's trying to tread a fine line. I mean, like, would you be happy to pay Baker Mayfield 35-40 million a year on a 2 or 3 year deal? Like, my goodness.
I don't know if he's worth that Daniel Jones money.
Yeah. Unfortunately for poor old Brian, that's the stick everyone is gonna and teams are gonna constantly look at. Hey Brian, if it's any consolation, I think the Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, and Aaron Rodgers trades mean that everybody will be hesitant about trading for QBs potentially in the future. But I think that contract, I just think they're in a really kind of strange position where they might be losing their OC, they might be losing their what I would argue is probably their best player, Tristan Wirfs, and Antoine Winfield Jr. also up there. But Mike Evans is so good, and he potentially might be hitting free agency. It's just a kind of a strange position they find themselves in.
Right, that brings to an end our first segment of our second part of our Super Wildcard weekend. Stay with us, talking points. Brian, let's go to Bills Steelers next, because the Steelers lost. That much was expected, and it was kind of strange after the game that there was a mini tornado of speculation about Mike Tomlin's future, which he's now cleared up himself. Actually, while we've been recording this past hour, he's told the players apparently that he is staying on. Any other result would have been crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of Steelers fans are growing frustrated though by the fact of it. I saw one piece today on their last 6 or 7 playoff games. Essentially, they're one and done time and time again. And I suppose Steelers fans are asking, when are they going to move to that next level again? And when are we going to see them push on from, it's all well and good making the playoffs and having these winning record seasons, which everybody kind of alludes to with Mike Tomlin's career. But when is he going to, get over the line again in terms of having a deep playoff run? I suppose in many ways it's a bit like, you're having a storied franchise, you're talking about the Cowboys. They kind of feel the same in many ways. They're making the dance, but ultimately when they get there, they're quickly going home again. And that's how Steelers fans are feeling. And we touched on it prior to the game last night. It was a game that I never really felt they would win. I thought the extra additional 24 hours would play into the Bills' hands. The game was over after the Josh Allen 52-yard touchdown. And I know they came back and they galvanized, but they played like a team that we expect them. They were just tough and grinding for their head cause, but ultimately fall short. And
which, as we've learned over the weekend, you cannot take for granted when you saw the efforts that the Cowboys and the Eagles put up.
True, yeah, and that's the nature of a great coach, that they'll never give in and they'll continue to play for him. And they got it back to within 7 points, but then they allow a drive. And I would say there was some kind of questionable flags on that particular drive to allow the drive to continue, and ultimately the Bills put the game away. I think Tomlin's, I suppose, speculation today obviously was on the back of the press conference when he essentially walked out in the press conference, and people said, "Oh, that's the end of him." I looked at it a different way. I think he was more, "I'm sick of answering these questions. I'm not going anywhere, and I'll tackle it tomorrow. There's no point in discussing it now." In the immediate aftermath of a loss.
Knowing the character, I mean, Mike Tomlin is very considered in everything he does, Colin, and usually chooses his words very, very carefully. So he was sending a clear message with that. It's just some people, unfortunately, misinterpreted the message that was intended for them. It really was intended for the media to say, this is not even on the agenda. It's not important right now.
Yes, in some ways. Like I think the divide between and Brian has been talking about the divide between the Steelers fans and national media. It's funny. Jared Bailey, who has been on this show a number of times and this huge Steelers fan, he kind of keeps banging the drum about the playoffs and not seeing the offense kind of take steps forward. And Matt Verderam, who does a podcast with Jared, is on the national side of things going, Steelers fans are absolute lunatics for calling for this guy to be gone. The fact that, you know, he never has a losing season despite Duck, Mason Rudolph, Kenny Pickett. But I suppose one of the interesting things, a couple of things that I would say, the talk was that Mike Tomlin usually never gets into the last year of his contract, right? He never kind of gets into that lame duck situation. I don't know if that's accurate. I heard that discussed, I think it was on The Athletic, on their podcast. If that is the case, then it is notable that he is entering the final year. Do the Steelers look to do something about that this off season? And if they don't, then he will enter into the final year of his contract. That's something to watch. Also, what are they going to do at OC? Like I think they went basically down the corridor to hire Canada, and that was the first guy they've actually sacked kind of mid-season. Generally, they let contracts run out and then they move on. But they have to do something at quarterback. Like, it cannot be Mason Rudolph or it cannot be Kenny Pickett. Surely, they have to want to push the boat out a little bit. Does that mean that it's Russell Wilson? Kevin Clark was kind of banging that drum that, you know, you bring Russ in, he's going to be getting them. He's guaranteed the money off Denver. So all you have to pay is vet minimum, right? The Steelers, they're not a team that has a huge amount of cap flexibility because they have a lot of money invested in certain players. But if all you're having to pay Russ is essentially vet minimum because he's getting his money from the Broncos, can you build around? I don't know if that's the answer.
You can flirt around the idea, Colin, and, you know, last night's game was an elegant example of to me the fallacy of this idea that you just need a quarterback that's good enough. And I'm revising what I said earlier this season about the Steelers. My case for the Steelers making the playoffs in the first place was everything else is there. You just need above replacement level play from Kenny Pickett and they could be dangerous. But actually, that's not true. That's the recipe for making the playoffs and going one and done, which is what ultimately happened to them. Because Mason Rudolph was actually fine. Like, he had a shaky enough start. Obviously, it's a bad pick, and that puts them in a very difficult spot, the one in the end zone, when the Bills then drive down the field and score. It was a bit of a backbreaker, but, you know, he made some good throws. He did what you would expect of a player of his level, but we had just seen Josh Allen put that ball on what Tony Romo very accurately in the climatic conditions called the frozen rope to Kincaid. You know, brilliant throw down the middle, showing everything that he has: the arm strength, the vision, the poise. You know, the 52-yard run that he breaks off on 3rd and 8, which you talked about, Brian, which really was the dagger. You know, when your guy does that, you're going to win playoff games, like, as any GM will say. And I remember a lot of them being interviewed when they were talking about Justin Fields and whether he is or isn't the guy. And one of them put it very elegantly, albeit anonymously. We don't know who's the credit for this, when he said, "I need a quarterback who can beat you with his arm, who can win us a playoff game when it's on the line. If you don't have that guy, you're not going to win a Super Bowl." And most teams in the league, unfortunately, don't have that guy. And to the point, if you're trying to come through the AFC, you know, you've got Joe Burrow in front of you, you've got Patrick Mahomes in front of you, you've got Lamar Jackson in front of you. You're going to have to beat at least one, possibly two of those teams and two of those quarterbacks. So you're going to hope that they all have off days to get you to the Super Bowl. It's just not going to happen. Like, that's pure delusion. Unless you have a raft of incredible injuries and you get a Leicester City style season from somebody, it doesn't happen. You know, we the reason we celebrate the Nick Foles and the Joe Flaccos and the Jeff Hostettlers is because of how heroically unlikely that is ever to happen in an average year. It doesn't happen. It very rarely goes right like that, and you can't plan around that. It's just not a sustainable way to build a franchise.
I was going to make a point on the quarterback, but Colin kind of summed up a lot of it. I was just going to throw a few quarterbacks into the mix. I see with Tomlin's contract and where they're selecting in the draft, and obviously Colin touched on again the salary cap constraints that they have. it just strikes me it's a 1 year operation type model with finding the appropriate quarterback. I was going to throw a Tannehill or something like that into the mix, and obviously Colum's right.
Surprised you
because of the
haven't gone
nature.
with your friend Derek Carr.
Well,
an obvious
they're
solution
wrapped up with
staring
him,
us in
aren't
the
they?
face
Well, I think we have to come to that because there's a Saints
Carr
fan
goes to
making-
Steel Town. What better home?
They're locked into that contract apparently. Like there's Rebel Blue. Okay, he's probably feeling blue this evening, or maybe not. I haven't seen the news that Carmichael has been released by the Saints. That's a strange one in the sense that it wasn't
15 years. Yeah.
that offense never clicked. Went in there with a point to prove, but like maybe he's just not the player in which I thought he was. I thought there was another player there in terms of a reaction to how his career finished in Las Vegas with the Raiders. Hasn't transpired this season. Maybe a fresh start with a new offense corner. Could see that, but it's unusual. Where are they going to go for an offensive coordinator? For me, it'd have to be an upcoming type of guy that can galvanize an offense like what Ben Johnson's done over the course of the last few years in Detroit. Where do they find that guy? That would be an interesting one to keep an eye on.
Well, where do you find the guy, Colin, when you don't have, with all due respect to Derek Carr, but you don't have the quarterback? Like none of your real up-and-coming OCs, none of the top-tier candidates are going to take that job unless they're doing it with the Machiavellian idea that would they put in a year, they do the job well, and Dennis Allen gets moved on and you jump into his spot. Like, you know, there is a case for it there. There are only 32 head coaching jobs in the NFL, and you put yourself into whatever position you can, but you still then have to resolve the question of who's under center and how you're going to get this team with, despite all its financial engineering that would make Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers proud. And it's heading for the financial cliff edge on this one, and they're not necessarily going to be fun times ahead in New Orleans when all that comes home.
No, but you will get somebody that will, like, it's not going to be a big name, but I think, yeah, the likes, you know, a tight ends coach, somebody up and coming is going to take that, I think, with the view that they can do enough to perhaps earn themselves a shot. Like, again, Dennis Allen's seat, I think, is going to be hot next year. Like, you can't have what happened at the end of the season happen. And the Saints, like, I mean, you cannot, if Dennis Allen is remaining, right, which he seems to be, though, you know, I still, you know, like I said to Brian, if the Giants aren't making a phone call, I don't know how the Saints, like, I know the cap situation,
especially when you saw what happened last night, like, you effectively had a bye to the divisional round.
Yeah. But again, if you got Vrabel in there, are you telling me Vrabel isn't doing more of a job with the talent that is there? But it's the law of diminishing returns a little bit. And I just I think that you cannot have Dennis Allen and Jameis Winston on the same team next year. That just, the Saints need to make a marker there.
Brian, let's talk about a team that is still in the playoffs, the Buffalo Bills, who move on. They still weren't necessarily convincing, but
no.
When Josh flexes, he can take control of the game still.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people felt this game was going to be a run-oriented game because of the weather, but it wasn't really a factor in terms of throwing the ball, and that was evident by the opening 2 touchdowns, the 2 tight ends, and obviously goes off in the 52-yard. I just felt after that they got, I wouldn't say complacent, I thought they just kind of eased off slightly and allowed the Steelers to come back into it. But look, so we've seen teams, this team are expected to go out and blow teams apart because of the nature of the offense, but that's not the team they are. They're more rugged, they're more kind of gritty, they're ironing out the victories, even at the end when the methodical drive at the end when to ease the time off the clock. Years gone past, the Bills would have rubbed teams' noses and went in and scored a touchdown. That's not where they're at right now. I think they're recognizing that, you know, it's the way of going about winning games at the moment. It's just not what we're used to. We've seen this Bills team putting up massive points, but big games this weekend. And I think there's still Bills fans are still ruining that 13 seconds piece. And I always wondered if we ever got the Chiefs at home in Orchard Park.
Yeah.
They have their wish. They have their wish this week.
And this is the game they played for, Colin. But if it's a field goal game, one worry I'd have for the Bills, and I know whereof I speak because I still have the scars from the double doink from Cody Parkey. You don't want to have kicker issues. You don't want to have special teams issues in the playoffs. The Bills have had a lot of funky special teams stuff go on this year, including, and I hate to laugh at someone's misfortune, but I did giggle last night when the punter pulled his hamstring trying to chase after the block kick, like it had middle-aged man's five-a-side written all over it. Like we've all been there.
Yeah, poor old Sam Martin, who was a cap casualty in Denver, and the Broncos have kind of rued it ever since they let him go. But the Bills, I suppose, they haven't made a great deal of sense, right? In that, like, and this is where, don't get me wrong, like, I think analytics are really important. I think stats can have a role, but statistically they're a worse offense than they were prior to changing OC. But they have won more games and they have looked more dangerous. So it's a little bit, I suppose, that's why I'm kind of intrigued in some ways to see how the Ravens get on, right? Because the case for Lamar is, Lamar's numbers haven't been good, but the eye test tells you Lamar has been the league MVP, or was the league MVP, because that's a regular season award. So I think that is kind of interesting. But ultimately, to me, Josh Allen is the most fun player in the league. It's chaos. Like I saw somebody yesterday that I think one of the things was that it was just this random picture of a bonfire, and it was a guy holding a giant spoon saying, I have a large spoon, and another guy dressed in a banana suit going, I'm wearing a banana suit. And it just said, Josh Allen, what goes through Josh Allen's mind before he makes the most insane play you've ever seen? And that's what it's like. None of it makes any sense.
He is jumping off a snowdrift onto a burning table all day long. Like, he is the perfect man for Bills Mafia.
He is. He is the personification of Bills Mafia. He is magic to watch. And given the seasons that they have both had, it's great that we are getting to see Patrick Mahomes versus Josh Allen in the playoffs.
Brian, let's stay with the QB talk, because another thing that came up today was Tua Tagovailoa's contract. Dolphins general manager Chris Greer saying they want him in Miami for the long term. Now, that's exactly what, and Colin, I'm channeling you here, that's exactly what a general manager would say, of course, and that doesn't mean anything, because if you want to preserve his trade value, even if you plan on moving off from him or moving on from him, that's exactly what you're going to say. But, since we have the privilege of doing so, let's speculate. What should they do? Should they move on from him, or should they look to do that deal? You don't want to base it all on one game, but it wasn't encouraging what we saw in Kansas City.
Should they move on from him? That's I'd say no, because I don't know who would want to pick up that 4-year contract in which he signed last year, and where does he go, and what would the Dolphins have to do thereafter? The only way I see a scenario where he would go, and we are speculating, I suppose we are in the off-season essentially for the teams that are now over, would be that a scenario where someone in the top 10 was happy to move out of the top 10 and have Tua as their quarterback going forward, and allowing the Dolphins to move up into the top 10 and therefore be in a position. Because as much as we always talk about 1, 2, 3 in terms of the quarterback in the draft, the reality is there's always 5 or 6. Lamar was the 32nd pick in the draft. So, okay, there's been, exceptions. Mac Jones went 15. He hasn't materialized. But if you're in the top 10, you've got a proper chance of getting some.
Justin Fields.
Then you're starting the whole model again.
He has the feel of a guy that Mike McDaniel could have a lot of fun with.
Yeah, see, the problem is they're all looking at the CJ Stroud model now, essentially. But let's bear in mind that the number 1 in that draft, Bryce Young, let's look at that model and how that doesn't work necessarily when you go into a team. The Dolphins would be taking a big chance on a quarterback, no matter who it was, with the players around, such as Waddle, such as Hill. Hill in particular coming to the latter stage of his career. I understand why the GM's saying in terms of we're running it back with Tua, because there isn't really nothing else. And what else is he going to say in the week after they lose a difficult game? It's obviously come from the end of the season press conference. It's an immediate question. Where are we on Tua? He didn't perform last Saturday. They're going to look at it over the course of the season and probably say Tua, over the course of the season, his production was good enough to justify him being there next season. Whether people agree with that, that's another thing. I think Dolphins fans are probably even split on that. I think he's deserving of another year, but I think the rope next season maybe 10.
But Colin, what are we saying? Of course, I'm not going to move on from Tua. Mike McDaniel is the ultimate Kyle Shanahan disciple, so he's determined to win with the worst quarterback he possibly can have, and just to prove that it's not all about the quarterback, that it's the QB-proof system. So why wouldn't you want Tua in there? He's certainly a lot better than the worst quarterback you could have. If you can win with Mr. Irrelevant, you can win with Tua.
Well, we've about to see, I suppose, next week and over the next couple of weeks how Brock Purdy is going to do in the playoffs. And we've seen Brock have a couple of wobbles against better defenses, particularly against obviously that Ravens defense. So we're going to see. But I think Mike McDaniel is maybe in some ways the best schemer. But Kyle Shanahan is ultimately a better offensive coach. He calls better game, has a better feel for it. I think we've more examples of it. But Kyle has definitely, over the past couple of years now.
McDaniel's clock management is brutal as well. The Dolphins just torched so much time at the weekend. And I don't think they were ever going to win that game. But like sometimes he really gets exposed.
Yeah, I do think they could still be playing, and it wouldn't really matter. But I've seen like Kyle Shanahan over the past couple of years go in and borrow from Mike McDaniel, right? I mean, it's a copycat league. It's all about magpies, but I don't know where they can go from Tua. But ultimately, and Dolphins fans will hate this, but I don't think Tua can take you over the top. You go back to it. I keep going back to it. They were 7 of 11 behind the line of scrimmage. 7 of it behind the line of scrimmage. Like he couldn't even hit his guy behind the line of scrimmage, and they got 18 yards out of it. So I think they're tied into it for the 5th-year option. I think ultimately, they may end up franchising him at the end of that. But I think maybe you can get something. Maybe you can package a deal to go up. But again, like, you'd really want to have conviction in that.
I mean, in this draft, you're talking pick plus a player, and you're not going to be getting away with getting rid of a Jeff Wilson or someone who's down there. You're going to want somebody big out of that selection if you're doing a go fish.
You will. But it's just difficult, right? Because they are in a situation where their players are getting older, and they do need to win now. That window is there for them. This was supposed to be it. Injuries take their toll, but and people will say they'll come back. But Bradley Chubb has had injuries the whole time. Can you rely on Trot Armstead? Like, how long can Tyreek Hill continue to be as quick as he is? I think when you're dealing with that level of pace as well, you do tend to get those twitch injuries, the hamstring injuries that we've seen. Yeah, they had some really unlucky injuries perhaps on defense. But look at the way in which Jordan Love plays. Look at the way that Stroud plays. Look at the way that Josh Allen plays. You can't play that way with Tua, right? You can't play that way in the passing game. And you can't play that way on the ground. Like, think about the way in which, like, Mahomes doesn't tend to take that much contact. We saw it the other night, right? He was willing to drop the head, but you can do more with Mahomes. And the Kansas City Chiefs protect Mahomes, right? Ever since that knee injury, they don't do the kind of tush push stuff, but Mahomes is still prepared to run. Lamar runs. Josh Allen more than runs. But the Dolphins can't do that with Tua. A, his size, B, his medical history. I never want to see Tua get another concussion. Like, some of the stuff last year was horrific. I mean, it was understandable that he considered, his future in the game, but ultimately it limits them. It puts an enormous ceiling on them. I don't know how there's a way around that this year, but I don't think Tua is the guy that can get them over the hump, unfortunately.
Brian, one final story, and it is an interesting one that emerged today. The Welsh rugby winger, rather, I should say, Louis Rees-Zammit, going to try his luck in the NFL under the NFL's International Player Pathway Program. I mean, one of the more high-profile players we've seen from another code opted to try that path. And it is an interesting one because it just goes to show you that, talk about the grass being greener on the other side, but Rees-Zammit is on 225 grand sterling. That's about $284,000 at today's exchange rate. We still don't know exactly what he's targeting in the NFL. And obviously there's a long way between saying I'm interested in it and ever appearing in uniform or taking a meaningful snap. But, you look at the comparison. Let's talk about position groups here that are likely. Let's say punter. $1.5 million average salary for a starting punter. Kicker, $2.2 million. I don't know whether you see Reece Zammit as a skill position player, but it's interesting that someone who's an established star in rugby would consider the NFL, and because of the rewards on offer, he's not going to be the only one. The International Player Pathway Program, something that the NFL is a big fan of because it's a great, from a marketing perspective, helps grow the game in new markets. It helps bring fans from other sports and open up the viewing to new audiences. And I'm sure a lot of people will be rooting for him to succeed. Probably Warren Gatland won't be one of them because he was a little bit annoyed that he was about to name his team and then found out an hour later or an hour beforehand that one of his star wingers is not going to be available.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is down to the player pathway. Obviously, you're right, a skilled player like this and a player, but I suppose with a high profile to make this decision. But I think 5 or 6 years ago, this opportunity doesn't come about. I think the pathway, we've had Scott Pioli on, former GM in the league, and he's actively and heavily involved in the player program. And I think the league have done so much to give these opportunities, not just these guys, but lesser players. But like this, we've seen in the past, Irish rugby players would suggest they could go to the NFL and they could be kickers, but it's a very different, they get over there and they quickly realize the magnitude of what's involved is very different to being, a kicker in rugby or whatever particular position in which they play. But this program is giving everybody the opportunity, and it is an interesting move. It comes at a strange time as well. Like as you said, so close to certain things in the rugby calendar and schedule being announced for him to make this decision now. And I suppose he's trying to give himself the best opportunity over the course of the off-season to put himself in a position to potentially get a camp opportunity, whether it's voluntary camp or training camp come July. But it's an interesting piece of news here. I don't think it's really washed its face in the States yet. It'll be interesting to see what the reaction is over there when it does finally kind of hit their airwaves.
And it probably won't, Colin, unless and until he does something that makes it worthy of attention stateside, right? Because, and if that happens, it's a win-win both for him and the NFL. Great for him, obviously, as a player, but it'll also do wonders for the NFL in Wales.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, like if it happens, but there is an awfully long way to go. Look, he's a top athlete, but he's going up against other top athletes. I mean, I think one of the things that's even interesting is, and we could have talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's relevant here too. Think about the Eagles' defense, right? Think about all the Georgia, right, defense who were absolute standout in college, right? And who have not looked the same at all in the NFL. Now, again, maybe a change of coordinator, change of head coach, and they'll begin to develop. But those guys looked sensational at the college level, right? They're top 1% athletes, and they're struggling to make the transition. I'm not saying it can't happen. Of course it can. But it's funny when guys from outside tend to make it. Like you think about the 49ers and the punter, and when there was the fake punt, well, which he kind of called himself a couple of weeks ago, and all the players, they're not even, oh yeah, the Australian. Oh, I saw the Australian run it out. It's like, do you guys know his name, or is he just the Australian to that? Now, I will say we heard Matt LaFleur call out Dan Whelan's name when he was given the victory speech.
Brandon Aubrey was one of the stars of the season for the Cowboys before it all fell flat. A guy who turned to the NFL very late, soccer player at Notre Dame.
Yeah, no, I mean that's what can be interesting. These stories happen, and hey, Kurt Warner will kind of forever be one of the stories that people will look at. So things can happen, and sometimes you kind of have to take a little bit of a different path. I think he's probably going over now to maximize it. I wonder if he ends up potentially playing in one of the developmental leagues initially. That I think that could be a possibility that might happen. But I think it shows again the way in which the game is growing, and the fact that it is such a behemoth stateside, and it has the resources just to put its tentacles everywhere.
Well, we wish him well, and if he wants to learn a little bit more about the game, he could do worse than take a trip over to Dublin to our live show with Peter King on the 28th of March. And we're happy to welcome him into the fold. You can get tickets for that, still available across our social channels if you want to check out the link. We'd love to have you there. Plenty more content from us coming between now and then, though, not least our game picks coming up later this week as we turn our attention towards the divisional round.